I am Philomena, 35 years old, and an interior designer from Seattle. My perfect 8-year marriage to James seemed like a fairy tale until I noticed strange behavior around our backyard pool. Never would I have imagined that the crystal blue water, where we shared so many memories, would reveal his deepest betrayal. What I put in that pool not only turned his secret lover blue, but washed away all my illusions about our marriage. Let me know where you are watching from and subscribe to hear how I turned the tables on my cheating husband and his swimming mistress. My life before the betrayal seemed picture perfect. I built a successful career as an interior designer, transforming Seattle homes with my signature blend of modern elegance and comfort. My reputation in the industry grew steadily, and I earned the respect of clients and competitors alike for my attention to detail and innovative approaches. I met James at a charity gala 6 years before we married. He stood across the room, tall with dark hair and an infectious smile that caught my attention immediately. When our eyes locked, something electric passed between us. By the end of the night, we had talked for hours, discovering shared interests in travel art and creating beautiful spaces. It truly was love at first sight, the kind you read about in romance novels, but rarely experience in reality. Our romance moved quickly after that night. James pursued me with an intensity that was flattering and exciting. Flowers appeared at my office, thoughtful text messages brightened my mornings, and each date felt more magical than the last. Within 6 months, we were discussing marriage. Some friends suggested we were moving too fast, but when something feels that right, why wait? Our wedding was everything I had dreamed of since childhood. We exchanged vows in a garden ceremony, surrounded by 100 of our closest friends and family. My father cried as he walked me down the aisle, and James looked at me as though I was the only woman in the world. The reception lasted until sunrise with dancing laughter and promises of forever. After returning from our honeymoon in Greece, we purchased our dream home in an upscale Seattle neighborhood. The house itself was lovely with high ceilings and large windows, but what sold us was the stunning backyard with its magnificent swimming pool. The previous owners had installed a saltwater infinity pool that overlooked the lush landscape beyond our property. James and I immediately imagined summers spent hosting poolside barbecues and quiet evenings floating under the stars. The early years of our marriage were blissful. We traveled extensively, collecting memories across continents. We climbed the Eiffel Tower, sampled wines in Tuscany, and watched sunsets on Caribbean beaches. At home, we built a social circle of other successful couples hosting dinner parties, where conversation and wine flowed freely. Our friends often commented on how perfectly matched we seemed, how we complemented each other in every way. James thrived in his career as a marketing executive at Meridian Enterprises, one of the most prestigious firms in the Pacific Northwest. His creativity and strategic thinking earned him rapid promotions and the respect of his colleagues. I was so proud watching him succeed, believing we were building something special together. Our routine became comfortable and satisfying. Weekends began with lazy brunches where we discussed plans for the day over coffee and croissants. Summer meant pool parties with friends, the sound of laughter and splashing water filling our backyard. During the holidays, we established traditions like hosting Thanksgiving dinner for friends who couldn't travel home and cutting our own Christmas tree from a local farm. My best friend Amelia remained my closest confidant throughout these years. We had been friends since college, and she knew me better than anyone. She had been the only one to express concern when James and I got engaged so quickly, gently suggesting that perhaps we should take more time to know each other. I dismissed her worries, then convinced that what James and I shared was rare and special. Despite her initial hesitation, she fully embraced James as part of my life and became a regular presence in our home. As our 5th anniversary approached, James and I began discussing starting a family. We both wanted children, imagining our home filled with tiny footsteps and bedtime stories. We converted one of the spare bedrooms into a potential nursery painting, the walls a gentle green that would work for any gender. I began taking prenatal vitamins and tracking my cycle, excited about the possibility of becoming parents. Our neighbours, the Andersons and the Garcias, became close friends as well. John and Patricia Anderson, both doctors, lived to our left and often joined us for impromptu dinners. Marco and Sofia Garcia, with their 3 children, lived to our right and frequently brought their kids over to swim in our pool during hot summer days. Our street felt like a community, a safe and happy place where we all looked out for each other. Looking back now, I can see that I had created an idealized version of my marriage in my mind. The reality was that I was happy and believed James was too. I trusted him completely, never questioning his late nights at the office or business trips. When people talked about infidelity or marriage problems, I silently thanked my lucky stars that James and I had something special, something that would last forever. I was proud of the life we had built together and excited about our future plans. Little did I know that beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life cracks were forming that would eventually shatter everything I thought I knew about my husband and our marriage. The first hints that something might be wrong with my marriage appeared so gradually that I nearly missed them. James had always been attentive and predictable in his routines, so when subtle changes began occurring, they stood out to me like small splinters under my skin, irritating and impossible to ignore once noticed. It started with James working late more frequently. Previously, he had made it home for dinner by 7 most evenings, but suddenly 8 or 9 o'clock became his new normal. When I asked about these extended hours, he mentioned a major new client that required extra attention. The explanation seemed reasonable, but something in his tone sounded rehearsed. The new cologne appeared next. For years, James had worn the same sandalwood scent I had gifted him on our first anniversary. One evening, as he kissed me goodbye before heading to work, I caught a whiff of something citrusy and unfamiliar. When I commented on the change, he shrugged and mentioned that a colleague had recommended it. Why would he change something so personal without discussing it with me first? Then came the password changes on his phone and laptop. We had always known each other's passwords, not because we snooped, but because we shared accounts and sometimes needed to access information from each other's devices. One afternoon, I needed to check our flight details for an upcoming trip and found myself locked out of his phone. When I asked about it later, James claimed it was a new company security policy. That night, I noticed he kept his phone face down on the nightstand and took it with him even for brief trips to the bathroom. Perhaps the most peculiar change was James suddenly taking an interest in our pool maintenance. Throughout our marriage, pool care had been my domain. I enjoyed the chemistry aspects of keeping the water balanced and found the routine of skimming and cleaning meditative. James had always been happy to leave these tasks to me, but around early May, he began asking detailed questions about the filtration system, chemical balance, and cleaning schedule. He offered to take over the pool maintenance entirely, insisting I deserved a break from the chore. The strange phone calls began around the same time. James would be speaking normally on his phone, but when I entered the room, his tone would change abruptly. Conversations ended with quick goodbyes, or he would switch to discussing obvious work topics in an overly formal manner. Once I heard him laughing softly into his phone, a warm, intimate sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. When he noticed me standing in the doorway, he ended the call immediately and claimed it was a funny email chain circulating at work. Our credit card statements revealed charges that made no sense. A jewelry store I had never heard of, restaurants across town that we had never visited together, and a hotel bar downtown on a night when James had claimed to be working late at the office. When I questioned these expenses, he had explanations ready, each one sounding less convincing than the last. Client gifts, business dinners, drinks with the team after completing a big project. 6 months into these changes, James suggested I visit my parents in Arizona alone for a week. He claimed he wanted me to have quality time with them while he caught up on work projects. This was unusual as we typically visited my parents together, and they always looked forward to seeing both of us. Still, I agreed, thinking the break might be good for us, given the strange tension that had been building between us. The discovery that truly set off alarm bells came the day before my scheduled departure. While gathering laundry from our bedroom floor, I found a long, blonde hair on James' collar. My hair is dark brown and cut in a bob. The hair was at least 8 inches long and unmistakably blonde. When confronted, James suggested it might belong to his new project manager, who had leaned over his desk earlier that day to review documents. During my packing, I accidentally knocked James' phone off the bed. When I picked it up to check for damage, a text notification appeared on the screen from someone saved as Work Project L. The message preview read only, "Can't wait for next week. Miss you already." My stomach clenched as I realised Work Project L likely stood for a person's name, not an actual work project. 2 weeks before my parents' visit James and I attended his company summer event at a local brewery. While getting drinks at the bar, I spotted him in an animated conversation with a young blonde woman. Their body language suggested familiarity, standing closer than professional colleagues typically would. When she laughed at something he said, she touched his arm lightly and let her hand linger. James didn't pull away. When I approached them, James introduced her as Lacey, his new assistant, recently hired from the Los Angeles office. Throughout the evening, I noticed his eyes following her movements around the room. After witnessing these interactions, doubt began to consume me. I questioned everything, including my own perceptions. Was I being paranoid? Was I reading too much into innocent situations? Perhaps I was simply insecure about getting older, about the small lines appearing around my eyes, while James remained as handsome as the day we met. I began scrutinizing my appearance, wondering if I had let myself go somehow, if I had become boring or predictable. I confided my suspicions to Amelia over coffee one morning, laying out all the changes I'd observed in James' behaviour. She listened carefully, her forehead creased with concern. When I finished, she suggested I might be overreacting to coincidences, that stress from work could explain many of James' behavioural changes, but she also advised me to trust my instincts if something felt wrong. Her parting words stayed with me. You know James better than anyone. If something feels off, pay attention to that feeling. The weight of suspicion became a constant companion. I found myself checking his location on our shared account, noting discrepancies between where he said he would be and where the app showed him. I lost focus during client meetings, my mind wandering to what James might be doing at that moment. At night, I lay awake, analysing his breathing patterns, wondering if his dreams included someone else. My appetite diminished and sleep became elusive. The woman I saw in the mirror each morning looked tired and worried, a far cry from the confident interior designer who had once felt secure in her marriage. The not knowing was worse than any confirmation could be, I thought. But I was wrong about that. The confirmation, when it came, would shatter my world in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The final confirmation of James' infidelity arrived on what should have been a special weekend. Our 8th wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday in July, and I had been dropping hints about a romantic celebration for weeks. 2 weeks before the date, James apologetically informed me that he needed to attend a marketing conference in Portland that weekend. The timing was unfortunate, he said, but the opportunity to network with industry leaders was too valuable to pass up. I accepted his explanation with outward understanding, while inwardly adding this to my growing list of suspicious behaviours. The old James would have never scheduled anything during our anniversary weekend. Still, I wished him well and said we'd celebrate upon his return. 3 days before his supposed departure, I received an automated email from the airline rewards program we both belonged to. It contained a travel update for James stating that his flight to Portland had been cancelled due to scheduling changes. According to the email, he had not yet rebooked. When I casually mentioned this at dinner, he seemed momentarily flustered before claiming he'd already arranged to drive to Portland, instead preferring the flexibility of having his car. My suspicions now fully aroused, I decided to find out what was really happening. I told James I had scheduled a client consultation for Saturday morning when, in reality, I planned to follow him and discover the truth. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. James kissed me goodbye, suitcase in hand, and reminded me he'd return Monday evening. I waited 30 minutes, then followed the location on his phone using our shared account. Instead of heading south toward Portland, he drove for just 20 minutes before stopping. The location showed him at our house. My heart pounding, I parked a block away and approached our property from the side street. I had a clear view of our driveway from behind a neighbour's hedge. James' car sat in the driveway, confirming my worst fears. He hadn't left for any conference. As I debated my next move, a red convertible pulled up behind James' car. A slender blonde woman emerged, exactly matching the woman I'd seen at the company event. She checked her appearance in the car mirror, applied fresh lipstick, and walked confidently to our backyard gate instead of the front door. She clearly knew the property layout and had been here before. Moving carefully, I positioned myself by the kitchen window where I could see into our living room without being noticed. Through the window, I watched as James greeted this woman whose name I now remembered was Lacey. They embraced immediately, not the brief professional hug of colleagues, but the intimate embrace of lovers. He kissed her deeply, his hands tangling in her long blonde hair as she pressed against him. The sight knocked the breath from my lungs. Despite all my suspicions, seeing undeniable proof felt like a physical blow. I gripped the window ledge to steady myself as they broke apart, smiling at each other with obvious affection. What I heard next only deepened the wound. James led Lacey toward the kitchen, his arm around her waist. "It's so nice having the house to ourselves," he said. "Philomena is at a client meeting this morning and thinks I'm in Portland until Monday. We have the entire weekend together." Lacey laughed, a light tinkling sound that made my stomach turn. "I can't believe she bought that conference story," she replied. "You've used that excuse 3 times now." As they moved through the kitchen, I ducked below the window, my legs barely supporting me. When I carefully raised my head again, they were heading toward our backyard. I slipped around to the side of the house where a trellis of climbing roses provided cover while offering a view of the pool area. What I saw next would be forever etched in my memory. Lacey twirled playfully beside our pool, running her fingers through the water. "I brought my swimsuit," she said excitedly. "Your pool is my favourite part of coming here." James watched her with obvious desire as she added, "Swimming in your pool while your wife is away makes me feel so deliciously wicked." In that moment, I learned not only the fact of my husband's betrayal, but also its duration and frequency. This was clearly an established affair with routines and inside jokes. They had been using my home, swimming in my pool, probably sleeping in my bed whenever I was away. I remained hidden, forcing myself to bear witness to more painful revelations. Lacey asked when James would finally leave me. Soon, he promised her. "I've been moving money to a separate account. Once things are in place, he'll ask for the divorce. The pool house will be perfect for my home office, and you can redecorate the main house however you want." Hearing them discuss the disposal of my marriage and home with such casual disregard made something inside me go cold and still. The woman who had dedicated 8 years to building a life with this man meant so little that her replacement was already planning renovations. I learned that Lacey was indeed James' 26-year-old assistant, transferred from the Los Angeles office 6 months earlier, exactly when James' behaviour began to change. Shed initially rented an apartment downtown, but they discussed her giving notice to her landlord since she spent most nights with James anyway, either at her place or at our home when I was working late or away. Most painfully, I heard James describe our marriage as stale and confining. He complained that I was too focused on my career, too predictable, too familiar. He told Lacey she made him feel young and excited again, something I apparently no longer did, despite my every effort to be a loving, supportive wife. They disappeared inside after that, presumably to my bedroom. I couldn't bear to follow and witness more. Instead, I stumbled back to my car, my entire body shaking with shock and grief. The beautiful July day continued around me, oblivious to the fact that my world had just imploded. As I drove away from my home, now a crime scene of emotional betrayal, I experienced a surreal disconnection from reality. The landmarks of my neighborhood, familiar for years, suddenly seemed alien and threatening. The life I thought I had secured through love, commitment and shared dreams had been revealed as an elaborate illusion, a house of cards that had finally collapsed. I drove automatically to Amelia's apartment, the only safe place I could think of. When she opened the door and saw my face, she knew immediately. She helped me inside as my legs finally gave way and the full force of what I'd witnessed crashed over me in waves of agonizing clarity. The emotional devastation that followed the confirmation of James' betrayal consumed me entirely. The first few days passed in a blur of physical and emotional pain so intense I could barely function. My body reacted to the trauma with physical symptoms I couldn't control. That first night at Amelia's apartment, I couldn't stop shaking. My teeth chattered as though I were freezing despite the warm July weather. Amelia wrapped me in blankets and held me as violent sobs racked my body until my ribs ached and my throat felt raw. I vomited twice that night, my body physically rejecting the toxic truth I'd been forced to swallow. Sleep eluded me completely for nearly 3 days. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw James and Lacey embracing in our living room, or heard their casual discussion of replacing me in my own home. The few times I managed to drift off nightmares jolted me awake, my heart racing and sweat soaking my borrowed pajamas. Amelia took emergency leave from her job as a high school counselor to stay with me that first week. She forced me to drink water and eat small amounts, though everything tasted like cardboard. She fielded calls and texts from James, who began reaching out when I didn't return home Saturday night as expected. She simply told him I was with her and needed space without revealing what I knew. In those initial days of shock, my mind raced through every moment of our 8 years together, re-examining each memory through this new, horrifying lens. Had there been signs I missed from the beginning? How many business trips had actually been covers for time with other women? Was Lacey the first, or merely the latest, in a series of betrayals? I tortured myself with calculations. If the affair had been going on for 6 months, that meant approximately 180 days of lies. If they met 3 times a week, that translated to over 70 encounters. More than 70 times my husband had chosen another woman over me, had deliberately constructed elaborate deceptions to facilitate his betrayal. The timeline I pieced together became increasingly painful. James had missed my father's birthday celebration, claiming a work emergency, but had likely been with Lacey instead. The weekend he couldn't accompany me to my college friend's wedding due to food poisoning. He'd probably been perfectly healthy in Lacey's arms. Every late night, every cancelled plan, every unexpected business trip now appeared suspect. After a week at Amelia's, I returned to my office but requested remote work, unable to face clients in my emotional state. I drove past our house at odd hours, seeing both their cars in the driveway more than once. James had apparently given up the pretense of being in Portland once I hadn't come home. home, instead using my absence to move Lacey in temporarily. The betrayal extended beyond James to our social circle. Through careful conversations with Amelia, who spoke to mutual friends, I discovered that at least 2 couples in our group had suspected the affair. They'd seen James and Lacey together at restaurants across town, sitting too close, laughing too intimately. No one had told me, allegedly, to spare my feelings or avoid getting involved. Their silence felt like a secondary betrayal, leaving me not only heartbroken, but humiliated. The physical toll continued as weeks passed. I lost 15 pounds in the first month, my clothes hanging loose on my frame. Dark circles formed permanent residency beneath my eyes. I caught colds easily, my immune system weakened by stress and lack of proper nutrition. Some mornings, I could barely summon the energy to shower, the simple act of self-care seeming pointless in the face of such betrayal. I discovered additional evidence almost daily. A secret email account James had created specifically for communicating with Lacey. Credit card statements showing hotel charges when I had been at design conferences. A hidden key to a storage unit containing gifts for her purchased with our joint funds. Each new revelation was a fresh wound on an already bleeding heart. Most painful were the conversations with my parents. I finally told them about the separation after 2 weeks, though I couldn't bring myself to share the full humiliating details. My mother cried, having always thought of James as the son she never had. My father, usually stoic, threatened to drive to Seattle to confront him. I dissuaded them from visiting, not ready to face their pity and concern in person. The future I'd imagined evaporated like morning dew. The children we had planned would never exist. The retirement we had mapped out, travelling the world as grey-haired companions, dissolved into impossibility. Even memories of happy times became tainted suspect. Had he been thinking of future betrayals while promising forever on our wedding day? Divorce seemed the obvious next step, yet I felt paralysed, unable to take legal action that would finalise the end of my marriage. Not because I wanted reconciliation, the betrayal was too complete for that, but because officially ending the marriage felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that 8 years of my life had been invested in a mirage. Sleep, when it finally returned, brought no rest. I dreamed of drowning in our pool, while James and Lacey watched from lounge chairs, cocktails in hand. I dreamed of standing invisible in our living room as they discussed my flaws and failings. I dreamed of the future they were planning in the home I had lovingly decorated, the nest I had prepared for children who would never come. The darkest moment came about 5 weeks after the discovery. Alone in Amelia's guest room at 3 a.m, I found myself researching whether Washington state divorce courts considered adultery when dividing assets. The search led me to numerous forums where betrayed spouses shared their stories. Reading their pain, mirroring my own, I felt a crushing weight of despair settle over me. What was wrong with me that the man who had vowed to love me forever had so easily replaced me? What fundamental deficiency did I possess that made me unworthy of basic loyalty and respect? These questions circled my mind like vultures, picking at the carcass of my self-esteem. But something unexpected happened that night as dawn broke over Seattle, as I watched the sky transition from black to purple to pink through Amelia's apartment window. The first stirrings of anger began to replace the overwhelming sadness. Not hot, destructive rage, but a cold, clarifying anger that sharpened my thoughts and straightened my spine. I was not the one who had broken vows. I was not the one living a double life. I was not the one who had thrown away 8 years of partnership for the excitement of forbidden pool parties. The deficiency was not in me, but in James, whose character had been revealed as fundamentally flawed. This realization didn't immediately heal the pain, but it redirected it. Rather than turning the hurt inward as self-recrimination, I began to channel it outward, toward the architect of this betrayal and his willing accomplice. As the first light of day touched my face through the window, I made a decision. I would not slink away in defeat. I would not be discarded like outdated furniture while they planned their future in my home. I would reclaim my power, my dignity, and perhaps, along the way, a measure of justice. With my grief gradually transforming into resolve, I entered a new phase planning. If James and his mistress thought they could simply push me aside and take over the life I'd helped build, they were sorely mistaken. I would not fade quietly into the background of my own life story. My first step was consulting a divorce attorney secretly and without James' knowledge. I chose Diana Reynolds, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer recommended by a colleague who had navigated her own divorce the previous year. At our initial consultation, Diana listened carefully to my account of the affair and James' apparent plans to hide assets. She quickly began educating me on Washington's community property laws. She advised me to gather evidence methodically without alerting James to my knowledge or intentions. She takes half your clients to the pool, half to restaurants. I see a pattern, Diana observed dryly, reviewing the credit card statements I'd brought. This will be useful. Courts may not consider adultery for alimony, but hidden assets and spending marital funds on a paramour, that gets their attention. Following Diana's guidance, I began building my case. I photographed Lacey's car in our driveway on multiple occasions, carefully documenting dates and times. I saved text messages from James with obvious lies about his whereabouts. I printed bank statements showing unusual withdrawals and transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. I even recovered deleted emails from our shared cloud storage that contained intimate exchanges between them. Most importantly, I secured copies of all our financial records, investments, retirement accounts, property deeds, insurance policies, and tax returns. Diana helped me understand exactly what constituted marital property and what James might attempt to hide or transfer. Knowledge was power, and I was arming myself with every scrap of information available. While building my legal case, I also focused on securing my financial future. I opened a new bank account at a different institution and began transferring my personal income there instead of to our joint account. I updated my direct deposit information at work and applied for a new credit card solely in my name to begin establishing independent credit. I retrieved important personal documents and irreplaceable family heirlooms from our home during a time I knew both James and Lacey would be at work. Parallel to these practical preparations, I began researching the psychology of affair partners and confrontation strategies. I read books about surviving infidelity and rebuilding after betrayal. I joined an online support group for betrayed spouses, finding solace in knowing others had walked this painful path before me and emerged stronger. Through careful observation and the unintentional help of social media, I learned Lacey and James' routine. James typically picked her up from work on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they would spend the evening at our house, always including a swim in our pool, regardless of weather. Lacey had posted multiple vague but telling Instagram photos featuring glimpses of our distinctive infinity pool, with captions like "Another perfect evening" or "Tuesday escape," always carefully avoiding showing James or any identifiable features of our home. The pool became the focal point of my emerging plan. Lacey clearly loved swimming there, considering it a symbol of her victory over me and her integration into the lifestyle my hard work had helped create. The luxury shed, done nothing to earn but felt entitled to enjoy, became the perfect setting for her comeuppance. I began researching non-toxic hypoallergenic blue dye powder used in pool maintenance and special effects. The product was completely safe for human contact, but would temporarily stain skin and hair for up to a week, depending on frequency of washing. It would turn the pool water slightly blue, not enough to notice immediately, but anyone swimming would emerge with blue-tinted skin most noticeable on lighter complexions, like Lacey's fair skin. Through careful experimentation in Amelia's bathtub, I determined the precise amount needed to create the effect without causing any health concerns. The dye would need to be added to the pool filter system approximately 4 hours before swimming for optimal results. The timing would be critical. Next, I purchased small wireless security cameras disguised as outdoor decorative items. I installed them around the pool area during a time I knew the house would be empty. These cameras connected to a secure cloud account that only I could access, ensuring I would have video evidence of whatever unfolded. With the technical aspects in place, I created a believable cover story. I booked a legitimate business trip to New York, making typical arrangements that James would expect to see: flight reservations, hotel booking meetings with potential clients. However, I arranged for a colleague to handle the actual client meetings, while I remained in Seattle, hidden at Amelia's apartment during the critical days. The final piece fell into place when I learned that James' parents and siblings were planning to visit Seattle the following month. James had mentioned this during one of our brief, strained text exchanges about practical matters. He clearly assumed I would be gone during their visit, giving him the perfect opportunity to introduce Lacey to his family under controlled circumstances. I adjusted my timeline to coincide with their arrival, contacting his mother directly to confirm their visit dates. Barbara, my mother-in-law, who had always treated me like a daughter, mentioned how excited she was to surprise James with their early arrival. They planned to show up a day before he expected them, hoping to treat us both to dinner. She was completely unaware of our separation or James' affair, as he had apparently told his family. I was simply travelling for work frequently. This unexpected information was the final piece I needed. I modified my plan accordingly, ensuring the blue dye would be at its most effective when both Lacey would be swimming and James' family would be arriving. The confluence of these events seemed almost divinely orchestrated. Throughout this planning phase, I maintained minimal contact with James, responding to practical questions with brief, emotionless answers. This had the dual benefit of preventing him from suspecting my knowledge while making him increasingly confident that I was withdrawing from the marriage without a fight. His texts became less frequent and more casual, as though we were merely roommates sorting out logistics rather than spouses navigating the end of a nearly decade-long marriage. As the day of execution approached, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. The frantic pain of those first weeks had transformed into something cooler and more focused. I wasn't planning destruction, but revelation, not vengeance, but truth. I would simply create circumstances where the reality James and Lacey had been hiding would become impossible to conceal or deny. The night before implementing my plan, I sat with Amelia in her living room, reviewing every detail one final time. "Do you think this is too much?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm worried about you becoming someone you're not because of what they've done." I considered her question carefully, wanting my answer to reflect my true motivations. "This isn't about humiliating them, though that will be a side effect," I explained. "It's about taking back control of my narrative. They thought they could write me out of my own life story without consequences. I'm simply ensuring that the truth comes to light in a way that can't be minimized or explained away." Amelia nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with my response. And afterward she asked, "What's the plan for you beyond this moment?" I looked out her window at the Seattle skyline, the familiar pattern of lights, both comforting and alienating. "After this, I begin again," I said simply, "but I begin on my terms, not theirs." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, ready to reclaim my power and bring truth into the light. The morning of my plan dawned clear and warm, a perfect Seattle summer day. I woke early in Amelia's guest room, my mind immediately sharp and focused. Today would change everything, bringing to light what had festered in darkness for too long. After a light breakfast that I barely tasted, I dressed carefully in an outfit, both professional and striking a crimson sheath dress that had always made me feel confident. My hands remained steady as I applied makeup with particular care, covering the shadows beneath my eyes that had become permanent fixtures. Today, I would need every bit of strength and composure I could muster. Before leaving, Amelia hugged me tightly. "Remember, whatever happens, you have people who love you," she whispered. "This is just one day in a life that will have many better ones ahead." I nodded, grateful for her unwavering support through the nightmare of the past months. "I couldn't have survived this without you," I told her truthfully. "Now let's go expose some cheaters." We drove separately, parking our cars on different streets near my house, but out of direct view. According to the schedule I'd meticulously documented, James would leave for work at 8:30 a.m., while Lacey typically arrived around 2:00 p.m. on Tuesdays. When she had deliberately arranged a shorter workday, James would return early around 4:00 p.m., giving them several hours together before what would normally be my expected return time if I were still living at home. What James didn't know was that his parents and siblings had changed their plans at my subtle suggestion, arranging to arrive at 5:30 p.m. instead of the following day. I'd offered to help surprise him with a special early anniversary dinner, a plan his mother Barbara embraced enthusiastically. She remained completely unaware of our marital problems, as James had apparently told his family. I was simply travelling frequently for work. At precisely 10:00 a.m., when I was certain the house was empty, I slipped into our backyard, using my key to the side gate. The familiar surroundings of my own garden felt strangely alien after weeks away, the flowers I'd planted in spring now in full bloom without my tending. I moved quickly to the pool equipment shed, unlocking it with the key James didn't know I had taken. Inside, I carefully measured the exact amount of blue dye powder I'd determined through my research and testing. The powder was completely non-toxic and hypoallergenic, used in pool maintenance and special effects. It would temporarily stain skin and hair for several days, but cause no actual harm. I added it to the pool filter system according to the precise calculations I'd made, ensuring it would be thoroughly distributed by the time Lacey arrived for her regular swim. After securing the shed, I activated the hidden cameras I'd previously installed around the pool area, checking that they were recording properly to my secure cloud account. Then I returned to Amelia's car, where she waited, and we drove to a nearby cafe to monitor the camera feeds on my tablet and wait for James' family to arrive in town. The hours passed with excruciating slowness. At 2:17 p.m., Lacey's red convertible pulled into our driveway right on schedule. The camera showed her entering the backyard carrying what appeared to be a small overnight bag. She disappeared into the house beyond the range of my outdoor cameras. At 3:55 p.m., James' car appeared earlier than his usual return time. My heartbeat accelerated as both pieces of my plan aligned perfectly. Through the poolside camera, I watched as James and Lacey emerged from the house about 20 minutes later. James carried 2 wine glasses, while Lacey had changed into a white bikini that contrasted sharply with her tanned skin and blonde hair. They settled into the loungers beside the pool, James fully clothed in his work attire, while Lacey stretched luxuriously in the sunshine. Their body language displayed complete comfort and intimacy in what had once been my sacred space. They kissed frequently, touched constantly, the casual possessiveness of established lovers. Each touch was another confirmation of my husband's betrayal, but now it stirred determination rather than devastation. At 5:15 p.m., I received a text from Barbara. "Just parked at your house, so excited to surprise James. The whole family is here." This was the moment. I left Amelia at the cafe and drove quickly to my house, timing my arrival for maximum impact. As I pulled up, I saw James' parents' car in the driveway alongside his and Lacey's vehicles. The front door stood open, the sound of confused voices carrying from within. I entered my home for the first time in weeks, following the voices toward the backyard. Through the kitchen window, I could see the scene unfolding by the pool. Barbara, Robert, and James, two siblings, stood frozen at the edge of the pool deck, staring in shock at James and a now bright blue Lacey. The timing had been perfect. Lacey had apparently gone for her swim just minutes before the family arrived. The cameras had captured her diving gracefully into the water and then emerging with a blood-curdling scream as she realized her entire body had turned a vibrant shade of blue. Her white bikini only emphasized the effect, making her look like something from a science fiction film. James had been frantically trying to help her, offering towels and expressing confusion about what had happened to the water. In his panic to address Lacey's situation, he hadn't heard his family enter through the front door and make their way to the backyard after finding the house apparently empty. Now all parties stood in tableau, a frozen moment of revelation. James still helping the hysterically crying blue woman, Lacey clutching towels around her stained body, her blonde hair now streaked with turquoise, and James' stunned family piecing together the obvious implications of finding their married son with a half-naked, mysteriously blue young woman who was definitely not his wife. I stepped through the patio doors with deliberate calm, my heels clicking on the concrete. All heads turned toward me, expressions ranging from shock to horror to, in Barbara's case, dawning understanding and anger. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I see you've met Lacey James, assistant and mistress. The pool's a bit blue today, isn't it? Almost as blue as I felt discovering them together." James' face drained of colour as he realised the trap he'd walked into. "Philomena," he started, his voice strangled. "This isn't... I can explain. I think the situation explains itself quite clearly," I replied, maintaining my composure. I turned to his family. Sorry. You had to find out this way, but James has been having an affair with Lacey for months. They've been using our home while I'm away, especially enjoying romantic swims in our pool." Barbara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "James, tell me this isn't true." Before James could formulate a response, I continued methodically laying out the evidence I'd gathered. I showed them photos on my phone of both cars in the driveway on multiple occasions. I played a brief audio recording I'd captured of them discussing their future plans for my home. I even shared a particularly damning text message James had sent Lacey, accidentally using our shared cloud account, that he thought I'd stopped accessing. Lacey, still bright blue and wrapped in towels, attempted to slip away toward the house during my presentation. "I don't think so," I said firmly. "You were comfortable enough making yourself at home here when you thought I wouldn't know. You can certainly stay and face the consequences of your actions." James' father, a man of few words but strong principles, looked at his son with undisguised disgust. "We didn't raise you to be this kind of man," he said quietly, the disappointment in his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. James finally found his voice. "Attempting damage control. It's complicated," he began. "Our marriage has been struggling for a long time, and Philomena and I have been growing apart." I cut him off before he could rewrite our history. "No, James. There was nothing wrong with our marriage until you decided to betray it. This isn't about us growing apart. This is about you making deliberate choices to lie, cheat, and plan to discard me while keeping our assets." I turned to address everyone present. James has been moving money to hidden accounts, planning to divorce me only after he'd secured his financial position. He and Lacey have been discussing renovating our home once I'm out of the picture. All while I'm supposedly away on business trips that he'd encouraged me to take. The look of horrified recognition on his parents' faces confirmed they believed me. James' siblings stood silent, awkwardly shifting their weight and avoiding looking directly at Lacey, whose blue skin was beginning to dry in patches, creating an even more bizarre appearance. James made one last, desperate attempt. "Philomena, what did you put in the pool?" he demanded, trying to shift focus. "You could have hurt someone." I smiled coolly. Absolutely nothing harmful. It's a non-toxic, hypoallergenic blue dye, completely safe for human contact. It will wash off eventually, though it might take a few days. I researched very carefully, unlike you two who didn't even research whether the pool filtration system records when it's been used. At that revelation, Lacey's face crumpled further the blue tint, making her distress almost comical. She began sobbing in earnest mascara, creating black rivers through the blue on her cheeks. "I didn't know he was lying about your marriage," she wailed. "He told me you were separated and just keeping it quiet." I regarded her with a mixture of pity and contempt. "And you believed that even when you were sneaking around, even when you were swimming in my pool while I was supposedly away, the evidence of your affair is literally all over you now, just as the evidence of your character is all over this situation." I turned back to James, family who had moved physically closer to me and away from their son during this exchange. Barbara had tears streaming down her face, while Robert stood rigid with suppressed anger. "I'm filing for divorce," I informed them calmly. "I wanted you to know the truth, rather than whatever story James might have prepared. You have all been family to me for 8 years, and I respect you too much to let you be deceived." Barbara stepped forward and embraced me, her tears wetting my shoulder. "We're so sorry," she whispered. "So terribly sorry." As the family absorbed the shock, James attempted to approach me, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "How long have you known?" he demanded. "Have you been spying on us?" I met his gaze, directly refusing to be intimidated. "Long enough to know exactly who you are now," I replied. "And yes, I investigated my own husband in my own home after finding substantial evidence of betrayal. I don't think that's unreasonable under the circumstances." His face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, his father interjected. "Enough, James. You have disgraced yourself and hurt someone who has been nothing but good to you. I suggest you focus on damage control rather than making accusations." The family gathering dissolved shortly after that. James' parents and siblings, clearly disgusted by what they'd witnessed, declined to stay in our home as planned, instead booking hotel rooms downtown. Barbara hugged me again, before leaving, slipping her personal phone number into my hand and whispering, "Call me any time. You're still family to me." As the sun began to set over the pool, now empty, except for its faintly blue water, I took one last look at the home I'd loved and the husband I'd trusted. James stood defeated in the kitchen, while Lacey had locked herself in our guest bathroom, still trying to scrub the blue from her skin. I know about the hidden accounts, I told James quietly as I prepared to leave. I know about the plans to push me out once everything was arranged to your advantage. My lawyer knows too. I suggest you get your own attorney and prepare for a transparent, equitable division of assets. But how did you... James began, still struggling to understand how his carefully constructed deception had unravelled so completely. I interrupted him with a small, sad smile. "I loved you enough to pay attention. You might consider that in your next relationship." With those words, I walked out the front door, leaving behind the blue-tinged chaos I'd created to expose the truth. As I slid into my car where Amelia waited, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, but something more valuable, the first tentative steps toward freedom and the reclamation of my own story. The aftermath of what my friends later dubbed the Blue Pool incident unfolded in ways both expected and surprising. The immediate consequences were somewhat chaotic, as James and Lacey dealt with the physical evidence of their affair, quite literally staining their skin for nearly a week. I learned through mutual friends that Lacey had to take emergency leave from work, unable to explain her blue complexion in any professional manner. James, meanwhile, faced the dual humiliation of his exposed infidelity and the undeniable family fallout. Within days of the confrontation, James moved out of our home, at my insistence facilitated through our respective attorneys. He took only personal items and clothing, leaving the household largely intact until our assets could be formally divided. Lacey apparently refused to let him stay at her apartment, their relationship already showing cracks under the pressure of public exposure. According to a colleague who remained in contact with both of us, James temporarily moved into an extended stay hotel, a far cry from the luxury home he'd planned to redesign with his mistress. The divorce proceedings began immediately, with my extensive documentation providing a strong advantage. Diana. My attorney used the evidence of hidden financial accounts and marital funds spent on the affair to secure a favourable settlement. Washington may be a no-fault divorce state, but judges take a dim view of spouses who attempt to conceal assets. Within 4 months, we reached an agreement that allowed me to keep the house. Though I had no intention of staying there long-term, my business interests, and a fair division of our investments and retirement accounts. Diana's parting advice stayed with me. The best revenge is rebuilding a life so good, they wonder if they ever actually mattered. Those words became something of a mantra during the challenging months that followed. The emotional response from friends and family provided unexpected comfort. James' parents maintained contact with me throughout the divorce, occasionally meeting for coffee and expressing their continued affection despite the dissolution of my marriage to their son. Barbara, in particular, became an unexpected ally, sharing that she had survived her own experience with infidelity early in her marriage to Robert, though they'd ultimately reconciled after intensive counselling. Our mutual friends largely rallied around me, many expressing regret for not sharing their suspicions earlier. Some admitted they'd seen James and Lacey together, but had convinced themselves it was innocent or not their place to interfere. These conversations were difficult but necessary, helping me understand that while the betrayal was primarily James, the culture of silence had enabled it to continue unchecked. The most immediate challenge was addressing the profound loneliness that settled over me once the drama subsided. After 8 years of partnership, I found myself startled by the silence of solitary evenings, the absence of another person's breathing beside me at night, the simple lack of someone to share observations with throughout the day. I stayed with Amelia for 3 months, while looking for a new place, unwilling to return to the home that now felt contaminated by betrayal. The trust issues that developed proved even more difficult to navigate. I found myself analysing casual interactions with heightened suspicion, looking for hidden motives or dishonesty in the most innocent exchanges. If James, who had gazed into my eyes and promised forever, could maintain such elaborate deceptions, how could I trust anyone again? This hypervigilance extended beyond romantic prospects to friendships, work relationships, even service providers. The world suddenly seemed populated by potential betrayers. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Lynn, helped me understand that these trust issues were a natural trauma response rather than a permanent personality change. Through weekly sessions, I began unpacking not only the betrayal, but my response to it, particularly my elaborate revenge plan. Was I proud of turning Lacey blue? Not exactly. Was it an understandable human response to profound betrayal? According to Dr. Lynn, absolutely. One revelation that emerged through therapy was how much of myself I'd subconsciously suppressed during my marriage. I had moulded myself to be the perfect wife for James, gradually setting aside interests and friendships that didn't fit neatly into our shared narrative. With that constraint removed, I found myself rediscovering passions I'd nearly forgotten: charcoal sketching, modern dance classes, spicy food that James had always disliked, weekend hiking trips with no particular destination in mind. 6 months after the Blue Pool incident, I sold our house, unable to separate the property from the painful memories it contained. The real estate market in Seattle was strong, and the sale provided additional financial security as I established my fully independent life. I purchased a smaller but architecturally interesting loft in a different neighborhood, one with abundant natural light perfect for my renewed interest in art. Most importantly, it had no swimming pool. My interior design business actually thrived following the divorce. Perhaps the universe has a sense of irony, but I received more client referrals and larger projects during that year than ever before. Channeling my energy into work provided both distraction and fulfillment, allowing me to create beautiful spaces for others while reconstructing my own life from the foundation up. Female friendships became my lifeline during this period of rebuilding. Beyond Amelia's unwavering support, I developed deeper connections with women I'd previously known only casually. We formed an informal support network gathering for monthly dinners where vulnerability and strength were equally welcomed. These women created a safe container for my healing, validating my experiences without allowing me to become defined by them. The dating question arose eventually first from well-meaning friends and later from my own healing heart. Dr. Lin advised waiting at least a year before serious dating, using that time to reconnect with myself and establish new patterns. When I did accept a coffee date with an architect I'd collaborated with professionally 16 months after the divorce, it felt like stepping onto foreign soil, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. That first date didn't lead to a relationship, nor did the next few. But each interaction helped recalibrate my expectations and boundaries. I learned to communicate more directly about my needs and to watch for consistency between words and actions. Perhaps most importantly, I developed a finely tuned sense for authenticity in others, valuing transparency over grand romantic gestures. 2 years after discovering James' betrayal, I no longer defined myself primarily as a betrayed spouse. That experience, while formative, had become just one chapter in an ongoing story rather than the central narrative of my life. I had built a home that truly reflected my tastes, developed a thriving business focused on projects I found meaningful, cultivated deep friendships, and even begun a promising relationship with Daniel, a literature professor who approached love with thoughtful intention and scrupulous honesty. The last time I saw James was at a mutual friend's wedding, approximately 30 months after our divorce. He looked older, the confident swagger somewhat diminished. We exchanged brief civil greetings, both acknowledging the other without lingering. I learned through the grapevine that he'd moved to Portland after being passed over for promotion at his firm, the scandal having quietly but effectively limited his advancement opportunities. Lacey had ended their relationship within months of the exposure, apparently unwilling to build on such a questionable foundation once the excitement of secrecy was removed. As I reflected on the journey from devastation to rebuilding, certain truths emerged with crystalline clarity. The betrayal had nearly broken me, yet through that breaking came an opportunity to reassemble myself more authentically than before. I learned that while trust is always a risk, withholding it entirely exacts a greater cost than occasional disappointment. Most importantly, I discovered that my capacity for joy hadn't been permanently damaged, merely temporarily obscured. If you find yourself where I once stood, heart shattered and certainty destroyed, know this: the path forward exists even when you can't yet see it. Trust your instincts, document everything, and surround yourself with people who remind you of your worth when you temporarily forget it. The rebuilding is not linear, sometimes feeling like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but direction matters more than speed. I don't regret exposing the affair in dramatic fashion, though I sometimes wish I'd found the courage to confront the issues sooner. The blue pool served its purpose, bringing hidden truth into undeniable light. But the real victory wasn't in that moment of revelation, but in every day since that I've chosen to move forward rather than remain defined by betrayal. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a profound betrayal? How did you find the strength to trust again? Share your story in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more real-life experiences. Thank you for joining me on this journey from heartbreak to healing. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful landscapes emerge only after the ground has been completely cleared.